Okay, so hello everyone. Last session, I'm trying to make it fast. Usually I do this talk at Java user groups taking maybe more than an hour. Now I have just half an hour, 25 minutes maybe. So maybe something is rushed, but I hope it's working out in this time frame. So shortly about me, as I already said, I'm working in Paderborn. It's the smallest, largest city in Paderborn in Germany. So we have 150,000 people, and it's famous for churches, beer, and bread, because that's also our mascot there. And maybe you know the beer. I heard it. You can get it everywhere. Once we visited Dublin, and everywhere you could get Paderborner Pilsner. But you should not try it if you don't need to. Okay, so what I'm talking about, the whole thing about web development. In the last couple of years, somehow single-page applications became the de facto standard when building web applications and web UIs. But it also increased the complexity you have to handle. So you have different tools, new tools. Basically, every month there is a new shiny tool in the JavaScript world you need to try. And it increases the complexity you have to handle. You have to have an API you need to manage, and the front end. And the question is, do we really need this complexity? Maybe not, because most of the times you can easily start with static HTML. You have some pages, links between that, and you are getting quite well and quite far with that. But most of the times there is a point in time when you need more dynamic things. So think of endless scrolling, or you have a blog post with comments, and you want to appear new comments dynamically underneath your post. And that's the point where usually you switch to single page applications. The question is, do we really need that? On the other end of the applications, we have something like Miro or Figma, which are not very well fitted for a static HTML because they are so dynamic. So in that case, it makes totally sense to have a single page application with all the things they can do. But most of the times, maybe not. So let's see what we can do. What I'm talking about is, as I said, a quite old concept. It's hypermedia and hypertext. So hypermedia, I learned in university about it, and it was coined by Ted Nelson in the 60s. And it even can be tracked to the 40s when the BMX was introduced. What is hypermedia? So hypermedia is basically, the core concept is you have a nonlinear branching model between documents. So we're talking about documents, and there are links between these documents. And you can jump from one document to another, and then to another, and maybe come back to the first document. An implementation of that is HTML. It's hypertext. It's omnipresent today. I guess everyone has seen HTML. And think of Wikipedia as the prime example for this hypermedia concept, right? If you look at a typical Wikipedia page, you see a lot of links there, and you can get lost in all the links. And if you follow them, you are basically happy for multiple days to read and learn new stuff. But there are only two hypermedia controls. You have the anchor tag and the form element. These are two things you have, nothing more. And basically you have full page reloads, right? You maybe see the white flickering when opening a link, and then you have a new page, and it just doesn't feel like an application. It really just documents. Yeah, and you can only use the anchor tag to open new documents, and to change something, you only have a form document. So a form element. You have to post something to the server. The question is, why is that? Basically, you could say at some point in time, HTML has stopped evolving as hypermedia. And somehow JSON data API, single page applications arise, And these are not hypermedia because you can't follow the links. But on the other hand, anchors and forms have been enough to make the web grow rapidly. And if you think of older applications, older websites, what they just achieved with this simple concept was astonishing. Nevertheless, HTML was a bit too static and limiting. Maybe you remember jQuery. jQuery was the first thing that made it possible to bring more interactivity to static HTML pages. And afterwards, single-page applications came in. But what would happen if HTML has evolved? There is no reason why only anchor tags or forms could trigger a request. Why do you only allow a click and a submit? Why is it only get and post? Why do you need to replace the entire screen? Why not just maybe just a comment section or just a small form you just validated on the server and just replace that? And of course you can do that, but it's not part of HTML right now. So that's where HTMX comes in place. You can think of HTMX as HTML extended, maybe. And what is HTMX? HTMX is a small JavaScript library. So we have still JavaScript in our stack. It's just around 14K. So very, very small. And what does it do? You can think of it maybe jQuery on steroids, but it's more. So it simplifies AJAX, WebSockets, server-sent events to handle all this kind of stuff directly in HTML with additional attributes. So it's just declarative definition of your logic. So you can see what it's doing. So it fits very well the HTML approach. Think of an anchor tag. You don't define how the browser is actually loading that. You just say, I want to load that URL, and the browser is doing a thing. Same for a form element. You don't define how this form is serialized, sent to the server. It's just a declarative definition what to do, not how to do it. In the core of HTMX, you have maybe 4 to 5 essential attributes. This is AJAX get, post, put, and delete. So with that, you define where to get the updated data from, or where to put or post the data to. With AJAX target, you define what element to exchange on the page. AJAX trigger defines when to start a request. So is it a click, or is it, you can even define something like an element appears on screen, this triggers a request and exchanges some element. And the AJAX swap attribute is quite interesting because it defines how to replace the element. So just replacing the inner HTML, outer HTML of the element, or some sophisticated things like morphing with morph DOM or some similar approach. And with these 4 to 5 attributes, you are able to really push this point in time further to the right before you really need a single page application. Let's have a look at how this looks. So we have here a simple form element, which is triggering a post request on the key up event. I don't know if I can show it with the pointer here. Do you see my mouse? I think so. So you can just trigger it with a key event. So in this time, enter, you press the enter key. It will trigger a post request to the server, and it will target this element here. It's not on the screen. And the answer you get from the server will be appended at the end of this element. So it's a list. It will just be a new element. And the server now answers with partial HTML. So it's not returning JSON or something. It's just returning a small subset of the page. In this case, it returns the list item, the HTML list item. And with this, you can really define typical patterns for web applications. So when I talk about web applications, I'm talking about form-based web applications. So typical enterprise applications, you have forms, data, tables to display something. So you can define paging, sorting. You can even update multiple things on the page if you like. So you have really, really great power. Another example, that's the paging example. You see here, the list of items, and the last item basically triggers once a request when this element intersects your viewport. Then this request is triggered and the new block of, I think it's 5, yeah, it's 5 items is loaded, and the last item again has this trigger inside. So if you scroll down further, a new request with the next 5 items will be triggered. So it looks very simple and powerful. Okay, so where we are. Okay, remember the graph from before, from the beginning. Now we don't need to switch to a single page application quite early. We have a lot more possibilities to stick with simpler HTML static pages. You can do progressive enhancements, so you can even build an application that still works without JavaScript, with a different user experience, but you should not use AJAX Boost. What is AJAX Boost doing? It just intercepts, for example, all requests and make an AJAX call to the server. It's not a good idea to do that. But now any element can trigger a request. You can use any HTTP method, and any element can be replaced. So you can replace your form with, a validated version of the form. You can load new content on demand. You can do active search. You can just type and you update your search results immediately with the things you got from the server. You can even use advanced features like server-sent events. So it's quite simple to define or to connect your HTML to a server-sent event endpoint and just push updates from the server to the client side. You can also use WebSockets for that, and everything is defined in a declarative manner. This is simple, but yet powerful enough to do a lot of things. Yeah. So that's on the client side. What are we doing on the server side? Of course, you need templating somehow. Maybe Thymeleaf or FreeMarker, or from the older times, something like Java Server Pages. Of course, you can use that. Thymeleaf is quite nice. It's feature-rich. You have a lot of things like translation. You have good iterator support, formatting of units, and all the stuff. The framework integrations are usually very well. So it's a first-class citizen Spring and Micronaut, whatever. And it has a nice feature which is called fragments. If you think of what we are doing, we are now returning partial HTML. So we are returning small snippets of HTML, but we also want to use the small snippets in our page, for example. You can do that with Thymeleaf very easily to reuse these fragments. But what is bad about it, it's quite error prone because you don't have type safety, for example. You don't know what attributes the page really needs. Maybe you've heard about JTE. It's not that new anymore. I think it's 5 years old already. But it's pretty cool because you have a kind of type safety. It's a compiled template, and you need to define what parameters these template uses. So you really see and get to know what's happening. And it's very, very fast. Most of the times that's not needed because rendering is certainly not the most needed performance part in web application. Partials and fragments are also working quite well. Not so nice like in Thymeleaf, I would say, but they are working good enough for a use case. You can also use JStachio, which is also type-safe alternative. They are using Mustache templates and create a type-safe Java wrapper for the template. But I've never used it, so I'm not sure how the experience is, but I heard a lot of good things about that. Last week I was at JavaLand, and there was another nice approach to get this type safety back into our templates. Basically just using code for that. There is, I think this is Kotlin X, so it's an HTML DSL for building HTML documents. And this is a Java version of that. It's working good, and with Kotlin it feels okay to use. With Java, with all these bloat here and the needed to close the tags with a function call, it feels a bit strange, but it's a very nice way to create reusable components because they are just a function call. Like you see here in the right part, the common layout is just a function call, and it's a template which is rendered then, which is very nice. I planned a really short demo, but maybe I will move that to the end because I'm not sure how much time we have left. So keep it for the end. Okay, we have now possibilities to interact with the server. We can update HTML. We could be quite happy, but sometimes maybe you really need a client-side state. This could be you have maybe some kind of wizard where you need to hold some client-side state, or you have components, UI components that need to have a state like an open state, or they are closed, or something like that. And you don't want to manage this state on the server side. It doesn't make sense. But you can use something else. You can use, for example, Alpine.js or Stimulus, which is called from the hot-wired world, from the Ruby world, I think. And it works very well. They are both small and lightweight, so you don't add too much bloat like with a single page application to your stack. And they pair very well with this Hypermedia approach. When to use what? I would use Alpine for UI components, so really just UI state. And Stimulus works a bit different because you have to write a real JavaScript or TypeScript controller. With Alpine, you can all define everything in a declarative manner, so it's really, it feels more natural, and you don't need a compile step for that. That's very nice, but if you have the need to do some more things in the UI, I would go with Stimulus or Hotwired. Okay, so when to use HTMX? For everything? No, because we don't have the golden hammer for that. Most cases, I would say it's a good fit for form-based applications. So typical enterprise applications, you have a CRUD interface, an e-commerce site, and you have nested UI elements. I mentioned you can update basically every element on the page if you like, but with that, approach, you are really going into the jQuery direction we don't want to have anymore, because everything can be updated and you don't know when and you don't know where. So it should be in a nested manner and controlled updates. So maybe not a good idea to update something in the lower left corner and then update everything you have in your header bar, for example. So it really makes it hard. And what is very nice about that, you aim for full stack development with a small team. So because with that approach, a typical Java developer can achieve a quite good user experience. And you don't need to master two stacks. So you don't need to know Spring by heart and Angular by heart. It's, in quotes, just HTML. And of course, your application should follow these Hypermedia exchanges. So you should not try to have one part managed by a JSON data API, which is consumed by HTMX. It would work, but it somehow doesn't make sense, because the idea is to really use HTML snippets for that. And when definitely not to use it. Maybe you have offline requirements for your application. It won't work if you need to communicate with the server for every interaction or something dynamic. And if you have an application which updates a lot of stuff and maybe not dependent elements, as I said before, it's not a good idea to use it. And if your application is updated very frequently, so think of Miro or something like that, so real-time interaction, it's also not a good idea. If you're not in control of the server side, you can't use it, but you can combine a single-page application approach with HTMX. I think Astro.js is calling that dynamic islands. So you basically have a static HTML and you can enhance some parts of the page with, don't know, any React component, or maybe not Angular, but you can do that. But you should be aware that HTMX has certain security implications. It doesn't work well with certain parts of content security policies. It opens cross-site scripting attacks again, or a more widespread approach, because there are things like trigger events, which will trigger events on the client side from JavaScript. And you can then inject HTML, for example, in certain parts. And that's not a good idea. I think we have 5 minutes left for questions. I've put up an example repo on GitHub. You can explore it on yourself. There is a list of resources. Just follow them, and you can contact me on Mastodon or LinkedIn if you have any questions left or just want to talk about HTMX.
Thanks. That's a great presentation. I really love HTML or HTMX because, I can focus on my backend and it integrates so nicely with Spring Boot. So like our workshop we will do at DevOps France and also in a minute at 42 Berlin, I'm also using that for my front end because I can focus on the back end. And with Thymeleaf, it doesn't even look bad, right? It actually looks good, as I would know what I'm doing here. So it's pretty decent. And this is one of the questions in the chat. I think somebody asked, like, Marius asked, is it not good? I am using it and it's great.
Yes, it's great. Agree. I use it in smaller projects. In the current project I'm working on, we are using, it was created a few years ago, the stimulus part, and it's really working great. So you can ship features much faster, I would say, than having to define an API, and let the front-end team create the front-end, and then the API doesn't match the front-end. Where's the
So
demo?
then there's a question, where is the demo? So I fear the demo is at github.com/atomfrede/jdconf
Exactly.
-24-samples or with the QR code.
Exactly.
Okay. And thanks again, Frederik, for being with us, because I